Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the second last session of Day 4 at the Canadian Women in Cybersecurity Conference 2021, a week-long celebration of International Women's Day. Before I begin, I also want to make reference to the fact that today is a National Day of Observance for COVID-19. Take a moment to pay our respects, show our appreciation and gratitude to our frontline workers, and also think about the many, many families have struggled, lost a lot of loved ones as a result of this pandemic. Be kind. Everybody's going through this pandemic in a different way. And we're not all in the same boat, maybe in the same ocean. Some on cruise liners, some on rafts, some barely staying afloat. Be kind. I want to thank the organizers of this conference. The theme, We Are Cyber, been very inclusive, shattered a lot of previously held notions, and brought in as many people as possible to discuss and engage in all things cyber. So shout out to Maddie Raza, shout out to the advisory board led by Kat Kood, Rushmi Hasham and Shali for making sure that this conference not only exceeded what we did last year in person, but also set the tone for many more of such conferences to come. So in keeping in line with my previous panels and the theme for the week, Choose to Challenge, I'm going to begin by what am I going to choose to challenge today? What I'm going to choose to challenge is that which remains unchallenged in my life. A mentor of mine once said that it's not our light, it's not our darkness or the darkness around us that we're scared of. It's our light. That's because what do we do with what we know? I know about certain realities within my workplace. I see discrimination at times happening. What do I do with what I see? As a patron saint, from whom I take my name, says, eyesight is useless if insight is blind. And the ladies joining me today are going to shed some insight that I hope will allow us to shatter many a stereotype. A disclaimer, some of the concepts we're going to talk about today may offend some sensibilities, but that's the whole point. These ladies, along with me, may offend certain things we hold simply in our society. But the idea is not to oppress, to create a space for dialogue. The pedagogy that these individuals are going to bring forward, I hope, will lay the foundations for you as an individual and for your companies as well. My name is Abbas Hirji. I work at Durham College, both at the AI Hub and the Center for Cybersecurity. And as a male, I recognize my privilege. And I hope today to listen twice as much as I speak to these ladies who have been trailblazers in the space of cybersecurity. Without further ado, let's jump into this discussion on shattering stereotypes. Ladies, welcome to Canadian Women in Cybersecurity. I'm going to call out on each of you individually, ask you to introduce yourselves, but of course, with a little bit of a twist. Belinda, joining us all the way from the United States, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, the organization that you represent, and in your own words, help us understand your definition of what constitutes a stereotype. Belinda.
Thank you so very much. And I'd just like to begin by saying that it's a pleasure to be here this afternoon with this excellent organization. First and foremost, I am Belinda McEachern, and actually I represent Blacks in Technology Columbia, which actually is a part of the extraordinary Blacks in Technology Foundation. And Blacks in Technology Columbia is the official chapter of the Metro Columbia, South Carolina region of dynamic, growing, and vibrant Blacks in technology. We are also a nonprofit 501c3. This group is full of culture, and we're looking towards the future for making things happen. The purpose of our group basically is to stomp the divide um, by pushing those stereotypes on out of the window, which actually constitute misconceptions. And I could go on, but I'll leave that as a little teaser for later on. But we don't do this alone. And we also represent various other underrepresented populations who have an interest in technology or want to further their careers in technology by providing services such as mentoring, career course goals, advice. The list goes on and on. But we could do nothing without our members and our um, various numbers of partners. We just really want to put Blacks first and foremost and underrepresented populations first and foremost because we are a dominant part in this whole economic society. Thank you so much. And I don't know if I answered about the stereotypes. I don't want to give away too much, but for me, stereotypes, they are not just a bias against one group or another. I want to shatter those misconceptions. It boils down to what can be and what can't be. And we'll talk more later on that. Thank you.
Absolutely, and Belinda, I couldn't agree with you more. Much of what we learn is about everything that we can unlearn and targeting those systems that have enabled us with some of those biases that have inherent stereotypes within it. Talking about learning, it's all about unlearning. So, Belinda, I'm looking forward to this discussion further with you. Cassie, I'm going to go to you next, and then we'll go to my dear friend Karen. Cassie, please introduce yourself. You were at Women in Cyber last year. Tell us a little bit about your journey, what you're doing now, and what, in your own words, would you define is a stereotype in the world of cyber? Cassie.
Thanks, Ali. I'm excited to be here. My name is Kassia Clifford. I am a chief change maker with my own company where I do career consulting, and I'm starting to branch out to do some security consulting as well for early stage companies who do not know where to start when it comes to building a security program. I am a cybersecurity interpreter. What that means is since coming to the space, I found that I could not find any information on cybersecurity that didn't make me fall asleep or that was speaking in my language. So I started creating my own content. I've used this while working with a team of ethical pen testers based in Ottawa, Software Secured, where we were selling high assurance manual pen testing and security training for technical teams. More recently, I was working with an automation compliance company based in California, Drata, and learned a ton about how to get engagement from other leaders across an organization who may not be able to justify a security spend. What stereotypes mean to me are fears that are almost unknown to us, projected on others, and called truth.
And I'd like to work with that quite a bit because the truth is nothing but a matter of different perspectives. To our audience, those of you who met Cassie at CISO Forum 2019, but also at Canadian Women in Cybersecurity, the one thing that I can tell you is just like what Belinda says, she really, really focuses on community, but more importantly than that, she's built strength and courage over a period of time through her own journey. If you want to look at somebody who's an embodiment of float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, have a conversation with Cassie about that. Cassie, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. It's good to have you on. Last but not the least, Karen. Karen, before I even ask you to introduce yourself, let me say this. You were actually the person that inspired me to hop onto this panel because at Cyber Exchange 2.0, you got me to think about the way in which I talk about cybersecurity. You were the first person who was gutsy enough on live broadcast to tell me, Ali, think twice about that word, penetration testing. With that, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about what you do and what does stereotypes mean to you?
Thanks, Sally, and thank you for sharing that. That's pretty awesome to hear, and thank you to Muddy and the CyberX team. Hi, everyone. I'm Karen Nemani, and I'll say this about myself. I've grown up in cybersecurity over the last 20 years. working and having the opportunity, and I'll say privilege, as one of few women who got to sit at the table for projects and strategies that built identity management systems for Canadians across the board, as well as Ontarians, who's gotten to be part of building and operationalizing policies right through to actually delivering security services right through to sunset. So I am well aware, I am very privileged in that way. And in that, I got to work with, I'd say, well over 50 plus organizations. And in doing so, I've built a perspective, which is not only informed by my work in cybersecurity, but has also been informed by the fact that I am Gen X. I grew up in downtown Toronto. I am the very first Canadian born in my family. I'm actually not quite white, but I am privileged to fit in with white people. And I also grew up in the LGBTQ community. Lived a very different life than I think many of the others who grew up in the 80s did. And I've always applied that to cybersecurity. And so when I think about stereotypes, I think about the ways in which we other people and we see their differences and then treat them according to what we know. And it's sometimes intentionally or otherwise used to devalue or separate people from their work and their deliverables. And so in experiencing that along the way and seeing it, I became very, very passionate about making a change. And then I attended the Women in Cybersecurity WESIS conference about a year and a half ago and decided this is what we need here in Canada, and launched the very first international Women in Cybersecurity Ontario affiliate. And in that role, I am president and hoping to use my influence to shatter those stereotypes, Sally.
Fantastic. And to our audience, one of the things that I'll tell you about Karen, if you look at her career as well, I advise you friend her on Cyber Exchange, connect with her on LinkedIn, and that goes for Belinda, Kassia as well. But one of the things you'll notice with Karen is she knows that we can all build solutions to everything. But do we actually understand the problem? It's absolutely pointless to build solutions and not know the problem that we're trying to identify. And you're never going to eliminate these problems 100%. You're constantly going to bring down the level of risk and mitigate. And I think this is a conversation that I want to have with her, because this engagement of shattering stereotypes is not a product, it's not an end deliverable, it's a process. We're all in it together, learning and unlearning simultaneously. Ladies, thank you for that introduction, because I think that introduction itself is narrative enough to get a lot of people to think about, what do we mean when we talk about a stereotype? Belinda, with the permission of my two guests, I'm going to begin with you first, and thank you again for joining us on short notice all the way from the United States. Belinda, one of the things that I constantly tell my students is that when you look at change, when you look at working in technology, there are no end lines. It's a constant journey. Success is not marked by the end. It's marked by just a milestone, and then you move on to the next milestone. What you've done is you've opened the door for a lot of people, especially underrepresented groups, to join in this journey in technology. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of the things that you've done to build new community around technology and cybersecurity, especially for underrepresented groups? Belinda.
So very much for that question. And I'd like to begin by saying that my influence mainly comes from me being visible. I'm showing those underrepresented populations, hey, this is what you can do. It is possible. One of the main misconceptions, especially in reference to the quote unquote gaps in cybersecurity, we can't find qualified applicants from underrepresented populations, to hire, but nobody's getting down to the grassroots. I go back to my educational days when I taught within the classroom. As a teacher, I couldn't expect a certain air of success from my students if I had not provided them with the tools necessary to be successful. It's the same thing with technology and especially cybersecurity. You don't know what you don't know. These underrepresented populations, they're not getting that mass marketing. They're not getting the information about what's available. I mean, way too often they hear about what do you want to be, but it's stifled to the small box and you have this limited number of choices. They have no idea all of the branches that branch and stem from technology and cybersecurity. So first and foremost, they can look at my example because my example is my testimony, basically. Because I started out in education. I was a visual arts and graphics design teacher for over 17 years. But at the same time, I've always had this love for technology. But I can speak on the biases that exist because I have experienced those myself. So when I'm telling my story, I'm not just saying, the great side of, look, you can do this. I'm also talking about my struggle and my battle. I've had people, you know, just pretty much throw me to the side because, quote unquote, a young Black female, you're not supposed to know anything about technology. What do you know? Hey, we'll put you at the help desk. What about that? Talking about shattering something altogether. But then when you have this skill that speaks for itself, and believe it or not, I'm an introvert by nature. So I've always let my talents and skills speak for me versus using my verbal skills, which I'm exercising actually now. But actually getting that information to these underrepresented populations, letting them know what's available for them. You have choices and showing them examples of persons that look just like them from the same areas from which they come. Way too often, we're watching these webinars or these boot camps and these courses, and we have people on panels where it's like, hey, I'm successful. I'm working for this Fortune 500 company. But, they tell their whole story, but nobody says, hey, how can you help me? The people in the audience, So I want to provide that assistance. Tell me what you want to do. If I don't have the answers, hey, I'll find someone who looks like you who does, or can give you the ideals or create that career path for you. Thanks.
Belinda, one of the things on your profiles that I read was, and I apologize if I misquoted, but you had said, I don't want people to be impressed by me. I want people to be blessed by me. Because in that blessing, somebody realizes their path, realizes their light and the power that it truly has. And I thank you for doing this because there were two things that you said that are extremely important. Number one, as a mentor, as a lead, as an ambassador for Blacks in technology, you don't stand up there to say, I know it all. You stand up there to say, there are a lot of things I don't know. Come and talk to me. And for what I don't know, I will build community around it. That's where the real learning happens. It can be painful, but as a mentor of mine once said, growing can be painful. So lesson one in Shattering Stereotypes, for those of us who are leads, for those of us who are in positions of power and to some extent privilege, who have made it up there and continue to do so, pay attention not to what you know, but what you do not know, and go in that process. Belinda, thank you so much for that. Karen, I'm going to come to you, and then Cassie, I'm going to come back to you if that's okay with you. Karen, I want to build on something that you had mentioned in your introduction, if that is okay with you. And that is around mentioning something around working and living around members of the LGBTQ two-spirited community. To our audience, yes. I invite you to go and look at a website called Pride at Work. One of the stats that still this moment continues to, for lack of a better word, shock me, is the fact that while 80% of individuals from the trans community are college or university educated, the trans community still represents 25% of homelessness in Canada. What does that tell you about access to opportunity and access to jobs? Think about that. Karen, with that context, can you shed some light on what have you done to guide and bring more people, more diverse representation into the space of cybersecurity? Karen.
Great question. I think I'm going to answer this on two levels. There's the level of my professional growth and what I've done in my when I work and as a leader. And then there's what is WESIS and WESIS Ontario doing. So in my personal professional work, I know that I have very consciously looked to hire women, especially, and I heard one of the women leaders of WESIS at least at WESIS affiliate in the States say this the other day, I want to work with other women. I am the only one. It is hard being the only one, right? So I have consciously looked for women in cybersecurity. However, from a diversity perspective, I have been very conscious of who's in front of me to try and be aware of where they're coming from and who they are. However, I look at skills and can I build skills? And that to me is the piece that we as cybersecurity professionals and practitioners need to focus on, but also be aware that it is our responsibility to encourage diverse viewpoints into cybersecurity teams. And I'll pause on that one, that topic, and move over to WESIS because WESIS has done a lot and checked its own privilege and checked its own processes to say, who are we really supporting? And started programs like the Veterans Assistance Program. They started programs for BIPOC scholarships, and they just recently created, and this one really, really speaks to me and resonates, is that they put together an emergency fund for people who are in the middle of their careers or improving their careers or not able, for example, how many women are out of work this year and had to leave work? They have created a fund that speaks to that, as well as offer educational opportunities and build connections. And that's what I'm doing with the WESIS Ontario team this year. We are about building connection, building opportunities for Canadian women, allies, diverse populations across Canada.
Fantastic. And Karen, when you were speaking, and I noticed how punctuated you were and how measured you were, because there's a lot of experiences that you're going through. And I thank you for being personal about it as well. To our audience, you may look at it and say, okay, she supported in creating, and I'm being a matter of fact about this, supported in creating one fund, or she supported in creating community for one group. No matter how little, the change is important. Those who don't move will never recognize their change. That's something that Karen is emphasizing for us. We've got to start moving. Speaking of moving, I'm going to go from Toronto all the way to Canada's capital, Ottawa. And Kassia, I want to bring you back into the conversation. And I thank you for listening intently and what it looks like really absorbing what our colleagues here are saying. Kassia, you've always struck me as an individual both who understands the technology, but also the philosophy, the psychology, the interdisciplinarity behind cybersecurity. It's not just, a drop in that ocean belongs to me. That drop itself could be an ocean to somebody. It's about the little things. One of the things that I've seen you do very well is to break the biases and the elitism around language. We tend to speak in technology speak and tend to think that we've developed some sort of air and aura around us because we can talk tech. You've broken those barriers. You've broken that stereotype of tech talk and made it more and more accessible. Can you tell the audience a little bit about your life as a cybersec interpreter and how this has helped many, many people get into the space of cybersecurity, especially over the last 6 months? Kassia.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Ali. I think somebody has a quote, somebody much smarter than me, that said something to the effect of like making something difficult easy to understand is genius, right? So to be lost in a sea of acronyms in a world that seems so far away from end users of security products, average human beings like us, and technical CEOs. I've seen it, this wall of, I don't want to look silly because I don't understand what's happening on this call when they're scoping the technology I've built and we're trying to figure out how do we threat model that. To me, I think that my femininity, my womanness helps me a great deal because I am perceptive. I have learned how to do that as a survival mechanism in leadership roles. I've learned how to do that because it's been conditioned as a female to pay attention to other people's needs before my own. And now I leverage that learning in leadership roles to support me in helping more companies and people understand cybersecurity and what they do about it. So in the last, I'll say COVID for me has been an interesting time. It's been that for all of us. I too have privilege. I'm white, I'm affluent, I'm educated. I have family who loves me and cares for me. They're here in this country. So what did I do with that time, this extra me time? Well, I started creating the application security video series as a way of making that information more accessible. I've done a fair number of talks with graduating students about what I've learned from working in security for several years, both in an awareness training, risk mitigation platform, Bosaron, where we first met at CISO Forum in 2019 in Niagara Falls, as well as with software security pen testing, and more recently, compliance automation. Those talks for me are the best because early entrants to the workforce have not had 20 years of prejudice on them. They haven't had 20 years of being ignored or shut down or interrupted or spoken over or asked to leave the room because your opinion doesn't matter to them, right? All of those things that are something that I imagine each one of us has experienced at some point in our career, if not became a regular habitual thing until we left that organization. So for me, when I work with those young folks, they have acceptance institutionalized in their mind, and I'd love for it to remain that way. And what I do is I tell them, hey, you have a responsibility. I grew up lifeguarding and teaching swimming lessons. So that means I have something bred in me about civic responsibility. So what I've learned about cyber, I believe I have a responsibility to disseminate that in a way that people can hear it, because we've got a burning inferno that is our digital threat landscape, and we're all working and playing there. So for me, whenever, I had something beautiful happen this week, Ali, with students from the University of New Brunswick's Renaissance College. I'm giving a shout out to Cormac Stewart. I do not know if he's here, but that guy is going to change the world. And he's a software developer by trade. He's about to enter the workforce. And he asked me, hey, what do I do when I enter the workforce? Like, how do I be an ally? And it was the most beautiful thing I could have heard, because I said to him, you ask, just like you're asking now. You take a minute to say, I don't know, but I'm going to ask, and use your voice, use your privilege. So I'll say the other thing that I've been doing is I use my voice. Yes, with those videos. Yes, in speaking opportunities. Yes, I've done mentorship with women communication technology. I helped launch a conference for women moving forward, leaving domestic violence situations, finding financial freedom. Like, those are all really important topics to me. And when I'm in the workplace, I use my voice for me, and I use that for any other group that's unrepresented. And that's exhausting. So yeah, that's what I'm up to.
No, absolutely. And I think there's so much there that we can work with. But one thing that comes to mind is, and this is to our audience as well, cybersecurity is not the answer. It's the question. All of us need to answer it in our own particular ways based on the lived realities and experiences that we have. More importantly as well, Cassie, is that you emphasize the need for diversity, not just from a natural standpoint, but also from a diversity of thought perspective, a diversity of experience, a diversity of so much more that people bring to the table when they look at the question of cybersecurity. So thank you for doing that. Diversity is not something we need to explain, something we need to embrace. So Cassie, thank you for that. And on the bridge of that thought, I'm going to bring Belinda back into the conversation. And again, with your permission, continuing the same flow, Belinda, Karen, and back to Cassie. Belinda, a question has come in, and I promised you, I know we have a little bit of a flow for the conversation, but we're going to shatter that just a little bit. And if I go way off topic, please feel free to correct me, and we'll come back in line with it. Belinda, this is a question on how do you help organizations with recognizing their blind spots. So for example, how would you help someone like myself when I picked my team and I ended up picking everybody from one particular culture, one particular group? How do you help organizations from an HR standpoint, but also at the leadership standpoint, at the individual standpoint, to recognize their blind spots, especially when it comes to stereotypes? Belinda.
Thank you so much for that question. And to be perfectly honest, my number one tool, I really only found it last year during COVID. And that tool is my voice. Way too often, we see these misdoings, and it's almost as if you're waiting on someone else to say something about it or to call attention to it. And I was that person. I may say something, but I didn't really use my voice. And one thing that Kassia said earlier that really stuck with me, when she said something about telling the truth. And that's basically what it is, telling the truth. So when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, we don't need to think of it as just a the new catchphrase for the new millennium. No, we have to actually put it into action. What does that mean? So for me, utilizing my voice, finding out that, hey, my words do matter. People will listen. I'm speaking my truth. There's no right, there's no wrong. This is my observation. So my job or my mission is to utilize my voice to bring attention to those misdoings, whether it's on the job, if it's in a social interaction space, or if it's within a particular organization. Because I'm a part of several different very large organizations, majority nonprofit. And I may hear of situations such as internships and apprenticeships. But me being a graduate from Benedict College, one of the greatest HBCUs in America, and I don't hear those opportunities being shared to the HBCUs, then I'm going to utilize my voice. I'm going to ask the question, why not? No answer? Okay, what can we do about this? How are we going to change this? I don't want that one word answer. I want to see some action. It only starts with one step. I can't walk down the hallway without taking that first one step. That's all that I asked for. So when we see those things, we have to tell the truth and we have to speak on them. And another point that I would like to make is that I hope it doesn't go too far off that topic, but I think it aligns with it perfectly, is when we're talking about, you know, these underrepresented populations and how they may, you know, get marginalized or placed in certain boxes and have these stereotypes placed upon them. We can't just isolate the discrimination coming from one population, because oftentimes that discrimination comes from your own ethnic group.
Yep.
Nobody discusses that. It's always, I'm being deprived by that other group, or I'm being mistreated by that other group. But when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, who's talking about within that same organism, that same gender type, that same, you know, racial background? It exists there too.
Yeah.
So we have to start telling the truth before we can change anything.
Absolutely.
I gotta say something, man. I gotta interrupt you, Ali.
Go for it, Kassia. It's all yours.
Fired up. So you're hitting something beautiful, and I'll say, you know, what I can speak to is women in the workplace. Something a woman asked me recently: "Hey, I'm interested in getting into cyber. I take time in my personal life. For anybody who's interested in getting in the space, come talk to me. I'm here for it." And she asked, "What do I do? You have experience in male-dominated environments." I grew up in a male-dominated family-run business. I've worked with military communities. I'm an ex-military spouse. Like, I've been in that. Right now I'm in cyber. And she said, "What do I do?" And I said, number one, if there's another woman, you go make friends. None of this women not getting along when there are two of you in a sea of 100 men. Or if there's anybody who's on the spectrum of gender, acknowledge that neither of you have that privilege. So to me, I think it's very important. Something you're saying, Belinda, is, you know, we can get up to no good in our own little comfort zone, coming from a place of fear, right? And then a place of competition and wanting to set ourselves apart and be the most whatever name that makes me diverse than everybody else. So for me, I really believe it's very important to exercise kindness, as you'd said, Ali, acknowledging that COVID has helped shine a nice, you know, light for all of us to see, hey, we are all human beings and we bring that to work every single day. And I think that we need to see more camaraderie, sisterhood, whenever.
I'm gonna now jump on that.
Absolutely, Karen.
And
Floor is all
to
yours,
that one,
please.
Kassia, because you're bringing up something that I've been thinking about a lot, which is the concept of divide and conquer, which is how I think a lot of we approach a lot of cyber, we approach a lot of problems, as opposed to empowering and collaborating. And I see this as actually a huge cyber risk and problem in the industry. I have spoken up. I've spoken up very loud. I have paid for speaking up because of I think part of the way that I called out. And it's interesting, Ali, you used the word call out earlier as well. I've learned during COVID and the time that I've taken this past year, I'm trying to shift it up and look at it in a different way. And I'm now trying to work to call people in, to understand that my lived experience is a little bit different and everybody's is a little bit different. And rather than be afraid, because when we call out, we're putting someone on the spot, I want to call them in and go, do you see how it can be different and how we could do it differently? I think the same thing that needs to happen in cybersecurity, because we're missing risk and we're not getting the full picture based on those stereotypes, based on not listening to women or someone who is not of the same culture or race as yourself, because you are used to a level of privilege and influence that lets you not listen. And it's an unintentional bias that I see played out, but where I really see it impacting security is on understanding security risk, how it impacts the entire organization. And if you don't have a good mix of lenses, and this goes to your point, Belinda, earlier, you want to have a multitude of lenses coming to the table of skills and cultural lenses, because our threats aren't just one population.
Absolutely. And Cassie, I know you have something to say. And as I said, I'm going to listen twice as much as I speak today, but just for our audience. Now, I always try to make sure that I give you little sound bites that you can take and store. And people learn differently. A lot of people learn with quotes and quick statements. Beyond the fields of right and wrong, beyond sort of the judgment poles of right and wrong, there's a field outside of judgment. That's what this field is all about. Let's move outside of those judgment spaces. Let's move into the space where we can talk and call people in. Speaking of call people in, Cassie, you have a comment to make back at Karen. Please call us into that comment as well. Cassie, over to you.
Thank you. Yes, I love that piece that you said, Karen, about call in, not out. And I'll say it's something in my journey that I've worked on. I have a voice. I'm assertive. And I've learned over the years that rubbing people's noses in it does not get the message across. All that does is alienate me and put me in a position where I'm putting others down. So I've really worked hard over the last few years to see this as, that's an unconscious bias that person is unaware of. And it's really the only way I can look at it, because otherwise it's too ugly. It's too much. So for me, whenever we talk about security, so the parallel there specifically about security with organizations is something that I had really struggled with when I first came in the space. Was it seemed like everybody was being so condescending about those people and organizations who didn't have secure practices in place. And the thing is, what happens when someone starts telling you you're wrong? Well, we shut it out. We turn it off. We don't like being told we're wrong. We don't like being told that we're not smart and we're no good. That doesn't create buy-in and engagement, right? And so for me, I love when you say call in, not out. And I'll say, it's funny, my journey to get here, I started my career in social services work. I did social work and I worked with women leaving domestic violence situations at a women's shelter. And I did crisis intervention with military families. We had active deployment in Afghanistan. So that meant at a very early age in my 20s, I had all this training on active listening skills, on diffusing conflict, on changing patterns, on self-esteem, on managing anger. And these skills have helped me be able to work with an organization who perhaps they're not ready to spend $20,000 on a high assurance manual pen test for their, 6-month-old company that's selling to enterprise and government. However, they are ready to do a minimum that they can to manage their security risk, because they're looking at their overall business risk. They're looking at profit and loss. They're looking at human resources. They're looking at talent acquisition, and that's something that has helped me when I've felt the drive, because I'm fiery, right? So I felt the drive to get on the horn and shout it from the rooftops. But I really like that reminder. So thank you again for that call in, not out. I am going to use that one.
Absolutely. This conference has been full of little quotes that we can put on t-shirts. The team at CyberX, I know you're still designing a whole bunch of t-shirts for the year. Call in, not out is one of them that we definitely want to see going. We've got about 22 more minutes into our audience. Keep those questions coming in. Helen Oakley, shout out to you. Love the hashtag that you came up with as well, which is Speak Up. Definitely enjoyed it. Keep those hashtags coming. Instant message me if you'd like to have the question privately to me. I'll gladly bring it up. Our audience, also pay attention to the ticker notes below. Some really cool data points on diversity in the workplace that all of you can use in your own research and in the work that you do. Speaking about calling in, speaking about words and items that we've identified in this conversation, Karen and Belinda brought up the aspect of truth. And I want to take that a step further. Speaking your truth, but also these individuals, especially Belinda, have been speaking truth to power. So I have two questions, and I'm going to speak to first have Belinda speak to it, and then back to Karen, and then Cassie. Belinda, talking about the Foucauldian concept of speaking truth to power. You've built community around your truth. You've helped people identify better. You've helped people get their own voices. You've built mentorship programs, workshops around public speaking, workshops around how do you network, etc. Can you talk a little bit about the work that you do in helping others around you not just speak their truth, but speak truth to power? Belinda.
Thank you very much for that question. And I like to begin when I'm talking with people and with an illustration. They may look at me, and I may be very short in stature. I got that a lot because I worked within the juvenile justice correctional system for over 20 years of my adult life. And it's like, how do you work there? Short stature. And, I kind of scratched my head, but then I asked, I pose a little scenario for them. I say, okay, if you see me on the street or walking down the sidewalk, and if I'm teetering from side to side, no, I'm not intoxicated. No, I'm not about to faint. What you can't see is all the shoulders that I stand upon. If you could see all the shoulders that I stand upon, I don't have a short stature. I am a giant. So I lead with that first in every walk, in everything that I do. I came from people who had so little to having whatever was necessary and never being without. Those people who say, you can do anything you want to do. Here, let me help you with that. If you just have a little piece of this, hey, now you have two pieces because I've broken off a piece of mine and given it to you. I can't fail. I have too many shoulders that I'm standing on. I'm trying to keep my balance. So I'll begin with that. But with my journey, majority of my background's in education and educational technology. But a couple of years ago, when I decided to make that transition into cybersecurity, I wasn't met with, hey, that's great. You can help our educational district, or you can help the people here. Because we had one person who had just gotten an assignment as the quote unquote CISO for the agency. So being the person that I am, I took it upon myself. I entered into boot camps. I did self-training. I mean, the list goes on and on. But when I joined organizations in the community and I was bringing that information back to my fellow employees and cohorts, because we all know that at the end of the day, cybersecurity is not that cybersecurity specialist job. That's everybody's job. Hey, I thought it was simple, but hey, common sense is not common. But anyway, I was met with, oh no, that's not your job. You can't do that, because the quote unquote CISO was in a silo. No communication skills never came out unless there was a quote unquote security risk or a breach in the system. We're not even knowing the definition of an official breach and no, standards set in place. But anyway, that's another story. But I was actually made to leave these organizations that I was learning and growing in and bringing the information back to my cohorts and colleagues and friends and coworkers, because that wasn't my job. That was his job. Yes, he was a male, Caucasian. And the leadership person, though, that actually went out of their way to get me taken out of this volunteer program was an African-American female in a leadership position for maybe a year with this agency that I had put my life into for over 20 years. And I say all of that to say, going back to telling the truth, it can be someone who looks just like you. I just want, if I could leave anything with the audience today, is when you're thinking about that discrimination, whether it's in technology or any type of career, don't just look at the status quo or what you see in the media that, hey, it's just that population or this population. It could be the same population that looks just like you. But being the person that I am, and going back to what I said earlier, I stand on too many shoulders. I can't fail. And I'm constantly growing. I'm constantly learning. I've learned so much today just from you panelists. It's an honor for me to be here with you. So I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you.
And with that, I am going to say another shout out to you, Kassie, because you dropped this note in the chat. So to our audience, we've got our own chat going here as well, where she said, Ali, pay attention to the fact that this is a woman of color, a person of color in the space of cybersecurity who also has to work 5 times harder than others. And we need to pay attention to what's visible in front of us. Otherwise, that eyesight is useless. Thank you so much, Belinda, for that. There are many ways to go forward and only one way to stand still. Go forward, stop standing still. Love that message. Speaking of truth to power, we've got about 13 more minutes, and I know we can continue this conversation. Karen, I want to come back to you because this is a question that has come in. You've not only spoken truth to power, you have, if I may use the word correctly, you've borne the consequences also of speaking truth to power. A, could you talk a little bit more, if you feel okay about it, what those consequences were? But B, you've also spoken truth to power and deconstructed language. You've drawn attention to the words that we use. Can you talk to us about how that journey is going and what kind of changes are you trying to champion?
Oh, that's a fascinating question for me. I came into cybersecurity and I have had on occasion some really crazy experiences that have had me speaking up. And just note, this is no one, as I said, my career is 20 something years. So I will share that, for example, I had one place I worked with that I would walk into meetings and they would show me pornography at the very beginning of the meeting. That is a way to put a woman off her stride, and you have a choice in those moments to sit and say, do I say something or am I one of the guys? And if you do say something, which I did, the discomfort that comes and the loss of the conversation and the loss of actually being at work, it just silos you out of the entire conversation. And I stayed there for a very long time, and we all learned together. That's, to me, part of calling in, but it does set you apart when you are different. I was the only female working there. I was the only one they would trot out when they wanted to show that they had women working there. That, me and the secretary, who was awesome, by the way. And there's nothing, I myself have been a secretary. But that's just one example. I have obviously grown since then and worked with many teams, but I've often had my words questioned, and I go back to you have to work 5 times as hard to prove yourself. I could have someone beside me who has been in cyber for all of 3 weeks, and they were listened to more than I was listened to. And that shocked me. And that's why you hear me speak the way I do. I try to be very, very careful with what I say, because I have been questioned so often. And now I'll also add that at the time when I was working in these places, I was invited to speak on behalf of women in cybersecurity. I ran for the hills because I felt like such a failure. I had changed nothing. So what good was I doing? And in fact, that's something I've been struggling with these past 5 years, is how do you take your experiences over 25 years, and the world is a very different place today, but how do you make it into something meaningful that could contribute to your profession? For me, that's WESIS. That is a place I am starting. I have much to learn and grow.
And Karen, you know what? I really like the way in which you address the aspect of language by also relating to the experiences that you've had. That moment when you talked about going into a meeting, a male-dominated space, pornography playing, you know, that could also serve as a metaphor for, and I know you face that reality visibly, but for a metaphor for the kind of words that some of us use when we are in team meetings. And you know, I've been party to it too, where you know we'll make a joke around the idea of what a pen test is, without quite realizing where we are. And I thank you for making us aware and conscious of where we are at any given point of time. To a lot of my colleagues who may be watching, to a lot of males or other allies who may be watching, I'm going to repeat this and say this, that character is not what you are when everybody's looking. Character is what you are when you think nobody's looking. Because you think nobody's looking at that time when Karen walked into the meeting. She was looking, she was observing, she was experiencing. We need to start calling in, we need to start reflecting on that. Speaking on reflection, Cassie, I'm going to come to you, and then Belinda and Karen will come to some concluding remarks, and I promise you we'll have more sessions on this on the show that I host as well called the Power Hour. Cassie, a question that's come to you, and I really like this one. You mentioned that you do some work, I think you gave a shout out to University of New Brunswick. You do a lot with bringing different age groups as well. Now, we were supposed to have an individual from Coding for Veterans join us. Unfortunately, work, a very odd time with different priorities coming up. She couldn't join us, but could you shed some light on the role that you've played in bringing youngsters into the field, the work that you've done in bringing seniorpreneurs also into the field of cybersecurity? Cassie?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for that, Ali. So I'll say it's interesting because I've been coaching my whole life, mostly for free, because I do a lot of volunteer work. I'm a community person, I'm a builder, and I'm a relationship builder. That's part of why I have been very successful in sales and marketing roles in cybersecurity. And it's also what's made it very hard for me to be in sales and marketing roles in cybersecurity, because we're often focused on the transaction when it comes to that. I will say the amount that I have learned in this space, I am so fortunate to have had this hands-on experience. And so many friends of mine are entrepreneurs. Many are artists, and they're selling those, you know, their art in a different way with COVID here. And so I've had friends say, I have no idea what to do, but I have my passwords written in one spot instead of many spots, right? Like otherwise I have no idea. And CIRA, the .ca domain registration authority, they're based here in Ottawa, lovely humans. They came out with the Shield, which was something for any end user or solopreneur that had a .ca to help with making their workplace more secure. My girlfriend asked me, should I buy it? Like, should I get this? It's free. I don't even know what it means. So for me, because I've been putting myself out there and saying, hey, win for the week, this is what I learned. And when I look back at those original videos, they are very embarrassing. And every time I have a speaking opportunity with young folks, I share an embarrassing video, my first one, where it takes me 45 seconds to even explain who I am and why I'm there, because I'm so nervous, right? And then I share one where I get to that in 10 seconds. And I'm talking about the differences between red teaming and pen testing. And when would you purchase one over the other? And what's the experience for a hacker? And how does that provide coverage for your threat landscape? And why does it matter? So for me, I've found a way, like I'm grateful that my being my authentic self, speaking my truth, getting rid of worrying about what people think of me has opened up the door for people to say, hey, Cass, what do I do about this? And then I can educate them and meet them where they are. I luckily have had an eclectic background. So I taught English as a second language previously. I'm aware of adult learning principles. I've led workshops. So that's easy for me. I've got my mom on Zoom. That's cool. She's getting a password manager soon. I'll say, I certainly feel really grateful to be able to be in a position now that I have enough knowledge to share it. There is something I do want to talk about too, because I have the floor, so I'm going to take it because I know that we're going to wrap up soon. But we talked a bit about whenever Karen mentioned being shown pornography. I've gone through that in the workplace. I also, since putting myself out there on LinkedIn, I think some people mistake that as if it's a dating app now, and just because I'm being myself and sharing all this beautiful glory does not mean I am interested in people sending invitations to date me, there are other apps for that, right? So that in and of itself is an unconscious bias and fairly ridiculous. And again, I try to, where is it, Karen? It's on my sticky. Call in, not out, because we're all human, right? And we're all struggling, many of us right now, and looking for meaningful connection. I will also say, when we talk about the word pen testing or penetration testing, I have been in a scoping call where a CEO of a company said, I'm going to penetrate you. I'm going to penetrate you, over and over. And I sat there wondering if there was a camera on me other than the Zoom call. You know, how do you move forward in that? And so that's been a real challenge for me. When my worth in an organization is measured on a KPI connected to the revenue I bring in, and my client base, my buyers are all male, and assume that my good nature and smiling face might mean I'd like to have sex with them. Like, that's crazy. So
It is.
And it's also very real. It's also very real, right?
And it speaks to their concept of your value. You know,
or their concept of their own value. Honestly, to me.
Well, that was where I was going to go next, is that, you know, when we talk about, one of the things you asked her a while back was to think about solutions. And I don't know that we're the ones to come up with the solutions so much as the leaders in cyber need to find their solutions. That show that they value diversity, because it starts at the top, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Fish rots from the head, right?
Yeah, fish rots from the head. Absolutely. Kassia, Karen, Belinda, thank you again for being very personal and relatable about this. And I know that this conversation might have made a few folks a little uncomfortable. As I say this with caution in my classroom as well, we do need to get comfortable with some of these uncomfortable conversations, because that allows us to call in, that allows us to see what we're not seeing. I have a lot of questions that have come in, but I'm going to give the floor to Belinda for about a minute and a half, because then we do have to turn over to the next session. Belinda, a question has come in that I'll read verbatim. You've made the impossible possible. You've been an ambassador for change, but change happens in context. How is the shifting political landscape impacting blacks get represented in technology, especially in cybersecurity? Belinda, 90 seconds to you. I know it's a tough one, but if you can.
Well, thank you so much. The main thing I'd like to say is that it begins with you. I think we get too encompassed with who is in office. The first person you need to vote for is you. You need to know that you have that inner strength to do what you want to do, be whatever you want to be, create whatever you want to create. And speaking of people holding you down, if you remember one thing, if you know your rights, you never have to beg for them. You demand them. And that works for the technology world as well. You have to know you. So regardless of who sits at the White House, remember that position does not equal power. You have the ultimate power, regardless of who is in office. So with a changing of the guards, and I can speak only to me personally, it doesn't personally affect me on my aspirations and where I want to go, because they didn't begin when the voting and the ballots were counted and someone was elected. It began before that, and it transitioned through political terms. But we have to just get that message out. And once you actually find out who you are and what you want to be, and actually surround yourself with those people who honestly and truly want to help you, not just want to help you to have a list of names in a manual or a book, but actually help you by doing, not just by saying, this is what you need to do. No, show me what I need to do. So you have to have that inner strength. And we've always had to fight. And when I say we, I mean all of us in some form, or fashion. So that's going to be there regardless. But for me personally, it's about utilizing your voice, utilizing what you have to offer. And if you see something wrong, say something about it. Someone will listen. It only starts with one person. So that's how I feel on that. And I want to leave that last thought. Believe in yourself first and foremost. You're going to have quote unquote haters. Don't get mad. They're doing their job too. Because without haters, you wouldn't know that you were doing a good job. Thank you.
Belinda, Kassie, Karen, I will tell you this much, that we're going to have more of these conversations, not just with me as a moderator, but there are other folks, especially at the CyberX team, that have a lot of experiences to share. And I think there's a lot that we can build on together and propel each other forward. I'm going to ask the three of you just to stay on this session while I provide some concluding remarks. Once again, Kassie, Karen, Belinda, thank you so much for your energy, your time, and more importantly, your willingness to exchange on this Cyber Exchange platform. To our audience, in the next 1 hour, for the next 1 hour, you'll see some ads. You'll be able to network on the wonderful cyberexchange.ca platform. Coming up after this, if my memory serves me right, we have, I think it's the team from IC Squared that's going to be doing a presentation on the different careers that are available to you in cybersecurity and diversity within the field of cybersecurity itself. To our audience, remember earlier on I had said something about, what I challenge myself with. This session today has got me to remember one thing. It's not just about motivation. It's about discipline. And look at the discipline that these three individuals have expressed, going through their journeys, sharing very punctuated, nuanced experiences, but with a disciplined approach. I've said this before and I'll say it again. These are the kind of individuals that can even crack a stone because of the kind of power, the kind of energy that they give and grow within with each other. And that's key to shattering stereotypes, building community. I'll close by saying this much. As my patron saint once said, if somebody's not your equal in nationality, religion, faith, whatever else, they are your equal in humanity. I couldn't think of no better ambassadors about that message of equality and equity. Kassie, Karen, and Belinda. You can connect with them on cyberexchange.ca. This is Abbas Hirji signing off, and I'll see you at the next session. Take care, stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you very, very soon. Take care.